I saw this well-known preacher on Easter Sunday was saying, he was preaching that Easter Sunday, Resurrection Sunday, the death, burial, and resurrection that they preach about was all about the persecution of a black man, and that how Jesus was a black man, and that his evidence that Jesus was a black man was because he didn't get a fair trial by the Roman government, and that he used that, begin to manipulate the black men in the room and start declaring no weapon formed against the black men will prosper, and no legal weapon will formed against the black men will prosper, and all of this Marxist, fascist nonsense that he was spewing from the pulpit. And I was watching as men stood up in the room and they're shedding tears over this nonsense, and my heart is broken because I'm thinking, man, what you're hearing right now in this moment is not even consistent with the word of God. I know some of you got him hanging on your wall, a black man with locks, but Jesus was not a black man. We know from history and we know from the word of God that Jesus was an ethnic Jew, and he was born into a family of ethnic Jews, and he was raised around the Torah, and he learned the things of Jewish family, and he went into the synagogue as was his custom, and he fulfilled the law because he came to do that, and he came to his own first, the people of Israel, the Jewish race. So we know that Jesus was not a black man.
Greetings, my people. So today we're going to be discussing whether Jesus, or Yeshua the Messiah, was a black man or not. And even if he wasn't, I wonder why that is a problem for most people in America. Why is it a problem for people to think that Jesus or Yeshua was a black man? Because they don't seem to have a problem when he has been appearing as a white Gentile man in these churches for the past, 500 years? And yet they never come out and speak on that. But yet the second he's mentioned as being a black man, they all come out and speak out against it. So I'm wondering, what's the big fuss about him being black? Why is it such a negative thing for him to be considered such? So we're going to get down into who he was as a person as far as his ethnicity and race. But one of the first things that bothered me from that sermon that Philip Anthony Mitchell was giving is that he said Yeshua, or Jesus, was a Jewish person from a Jewish family.
He learned the things of Jewish family, and he went into the synagogue as was his custom, and he fulfilled the law because he came to do that, and he came to his own first, the people of Israel, the Jewish.
And that bothers me because that is not how Jews call themselves. They did not call themselves Jewish. They were just Jews. John 19:19, and Pilate wrote a title and put it on the cross, and the writing was, Jesus, Yeshua of Nazareth, the King of the Jews, or Yahudim. So they were not calling themselves Jewish. There's a big difference, and I'll explain why. Ish is a suffix used to form adjectives from nouns with the sense of belonging to, after the manner of, having the characteristics of, like, addicted to, inclined, or tending to, near, or about. So here's what happens when you add ish to the ending of Jew. It says, of relating to or characteristic of the Jews or Judaism. So it is not necessarily saying that it is that, but it's saying it's relating to or has characteristics of the Jews. But we know that Jesus, or Yeshua the Messiah, was not relating to, he simply was a Jew. So the definition of Jew is one of a scattered group of people that traces its descent from the biblical Hebrews or from post-exilic adherents of Judaism. Israelite, a person whose religion is Judaism, a subject of the ancient kingdom of Judah. So it's a pretty big difference between being called a Jew and Jewish. So I first wanted to point that out. Our Messiah came from the kingdom, the ancient kingdom of Judah. His religion was Judaism, and he was a part of the scattered people that traced their descent back to the biblical Hebrews. That all checks out in the Bible. So he wasn't calling himself Jewish. Neither were any of the other Hebrews. But when you're Jewish, you don't necessarily have to come from the ancestry of Judah. You can be a convert. You can be considered Jewish by having a Jewish mother. Notice it didn't say you could be Jewish by having a mother who's a Jew, but Jewish by having a Jewish mother, which is saying that your mom can basically be a convert and that will make you Jewish. And we seem to get this confused or mixed up with being actual Jews, people of the bloodline. When there's converts coming into this religion or this faith known as Judaism, that means there's going to be different races of people. There's going to be diversity. So not every Jewish person is going to look alike. And that's what we see within the Jewish community. You have Jews who come from Europe, you have Jews who come from the so-called Middle East, and then you have Jews that come from Ethiopia. And there's a large diaspora of Jews as well. And none of these groups look the same. They are diverse as far as race goes and color. There are black Jews, such as the Ethiopians, they would be considered black. And then there are white Jews. So how do we get to the truth of what Yeshua or Jesus looked like? We must first come to conclusion that what was presented to us as being Jesus is not an accurate depiction, because we know he was not European. And we know that people who looked white like this photo that's being shown, they did not look like that in the region that our Messiah was born in. So we have to take that into account. You also have to take into account the reason why we even have images such as that, even though we all know that it is based off lies. So the reason why we have those images of a white Jesus is because of Christianity in Europe. The Christians in Europe, who themselves were white Europeans, depicted Jesus, their God, as themselves. They made him in their own likeness, which is forbidden to do in the Bible, because that is technically idolatry. But they did so anyway, and they made him appear as themselves. And this is important to know because this all played a role in what colonialism did to this world. They used this image at the time that they were going around the world and colonizing all these different nations of people. This white Jesus served as propaganda, and it reinforced European dominance over those who they colonized. And it was a creation of God in their own image. So they was going to all these different nations such as Africa and the Americas, and they was preaching this white Jesus, and they was making them bow down to this image of Jesus.
God is white. Isn't it obvious?
Well, that is obvious, but we don't know if it's obvious that God is white.
And they evangelized them by force. They were killing millions and millions of indigenous people. They were killing millions of slaves during slavery. And they also used this image as well to convert black slaves. This image of white Jesus helped white churches justify slavery by linking whiteness with purity and higher moral standing. And after hundreds of years of doing so, they began to believe that this was actually the image of the Messiah. They began to believe that that white image of Jesus was the truth, just like Philip Anthony Mitchell appears to believe. Which is sad, seeing that he himself is a so-called black man and has a black family. So this should be able to hit close home to him. He should be able to have an understanding of why people believe that Jesus wasn't white. It's hard to ignore the history of what our people have gone through. The colonizers killed millions of people, but yet you hardly hear churches speak out against what happened. They almost ignore this part of history as if it never happened. And this is a problem because we should be able to explain everything that's in the word. And people question, how can we ignore something like this when these people were using the word or using Jesus to carry out these massacres and genocide and ethnic cleansings? And we just ignore it and don't give the explanation. And what this does, it turns people away from the faith, especially black people whose ancestors had to go through these things, or even indigenous people. So we should be able to give an explanation for why these things took place. Because I would want to know why millions of my ancestors were killed during the transatlantic slave trade by these so-called Christians. So after all this death and destruction that European colonizers were doing using the white Jesus that we all see today, instead of speaking out against that, they're focused on speaking out against a black Jesus. A black Jesus that has never done wrong to anybody. So why was he so bothered by another preacher talking about a black Jesus, when it was the white image of Jesus that we see that influenced the anti-black feelings that most of the world has today? It was the white image of Jesus that marginalized the experiences of black and other people of color, making God seem distant from their struggles. It was the white image of Jesus that obscured Jesus' identity as a dark-skinned Jew from the land of Canaan or Palestine. So why are we so concerned with a black Jesus rather than the one that seemed to have caused so much division and destruction in this world? But nonetheless, let's get down to the facts. Was Jesus considered to be black? So the definition of black is relating or belonging to any of the various human populations characterized by dark skin pigmentation, specifically dark-skinned peoples of Africa, Oceania, and Australia. So if you was to take the geography of where Jesus was born, that is the land of Judea, or what we now refer to as Israel, it actually falls within Africa. It sits on the African plate. When he fled to Egypt, he simply walked there. It is walking distance. So he is considered to be a part of Africa. So if that is the case, as the definition is given, then he could be considered black, coming from Africa. The second definition is relating to or noting the descendants of these populations without regard for the lightness or darkness of skin tone. So it's pretty much saying the same thing. Those people who come from these places are usually black. Third definition, which is the main one that I think Philip Anthony Mitchell was referring to, and that is African American. But we're going to save that one for last. We're going to see if he could have been an so-called African American. So we'll get back to that one. But based off the other definitions, he very well could have been considered to be a black person coming from the region that he came from. Take into account that the black population in totality makes up most of the world. So I hope Philip Anthony Mitchell wasn't believing that our Messiah looked like the Jewish people that's in the land today.
This tomb was for the second in charge of both Thutmose III and Amenhotep II. Thutmose III is the pharaoh that wanted Moses dead. Amenhotep II is the pharaoh of the Exodus, and in this tomb you have Semitic, or at least non-Egyptian slaves making mud bricks right at the time of the Exodus. This tomb has a connection to the Bible, and if you're going to say that the Bible is wrong about these people being enslaved, you also have to say that Egypt is wrong about these people being enslaved.
So that Egyptian tomb is showing what appears to be black Shemitic people, the Israelites. So if the ancient Israelites look like that, then wouldn't Yahshua look the same? The same Israelites had to dwell in the desert for 40 years. These people had melanin. They were protected from the sun. If you look at Israel today, it is number 1 in skin cancer because those people are not from that environment. Now, there's plenty of Bible verses to support the claims that the ancient Israelites were black or dark-skinned people. The most obvious one is right here in the book of Numbers, chapter 12, verse 10. It says, "And the cloud departed from off the tabernacle, and behold, Miriam became leprous, white as snow." So the context of this is that Miriam was upset at Moses for dating an Ethiopian woman, or actually marrying an Ethiopian woman, which was Zipporah, I believe. So she got upset at Moses, and this was her punishment from the Most High. She angered the Most High, and what he did was he caused leprosy to come upon her, and it changed her skin tone. It says she became white as snow. So if she became white, then that means she was the opposite of white originally. She was dark-skinned. She was black, brown, whatever you want to call it. She had melanin. And that was the case for all of the Israelites. But somehow, when it comes to Yahshua the Messiah, we say that he's everything but that. We even say that he looks olive. I never looked at a person and said they look olive. Like, what does that even mean? Olives are green, brown, black. Like, what does that mean? They come up with all type of things to avoid the truth. They even say that he looked Middle Eastern. But what does that even mean? Because there wasn't a Middle East during his time. That wasn't what they was calling the region. And mind you, the people that's in the Middle East today wasn't always there to begin with either. So when we say he looked Middle Eastern, that doesn't make sense because the people that's there right now, the Arabs, they didn't arrive until 600 years after he left, after he departed from the earth. That is when the Muslims came and then they conquered the land. That is when they filled up all these nations within and surrounding the Middle East, going all the way into Africa, going all the way throughout Iran and Afghanistan. These people were Arabs. These people were not Jews. They were not Judeans. They were not originally from the land of Canaan. But since they are in the land today because they conquered the land, people say that the Messiah looked like them. So then they come up with pictures like this showing them looking like an Arab person. But that's not the case, nor is that biblical. Our Messiah was Judean. He was not Arabian. He was from the tribe of Judah. And we have depictions of how ancient Judeans looked. They've been preserved in the Lachish relief by the Assyrians who conquered them and took them into slavery. And when you look at the depictions of these ancient Jews, you can see their hair texture, the beards. You can tell that these people weren't European, Arabian. They look like Negroes. You can see the tightly coiled hair. You can see the dreads, the locks. These were black people. And this is in the Bible as well to confirm what is being said. Nazarites were Israelites who wore dreads.
It's not even consistent with the word of God. I know some of you got him hanging on your wall, a black man with locks, but Jesus was not a black man.
They made a vow to the Most High from birth that they would avoid cutting their hair. Most of those who avoided cutting their hair, they're recorded as having locks. First book of Samuel, chapter 1, verse 11. And she vowed a vow and said, Yahuwah, if thou wilt indeed look on the affliction of thy handmaid and remember me and not forget thy handmaid, but will give unto thy handmaid a man-child, then will I give him unto you, Yahuwah, all the days of his life, and there should no razor come upon his head. This is referring to Samuel the prophet. The book of Ezekiel, chapter 8, verse 3, and he put forth the form of a hand, and he took me by a lock of mine head, and the Spirit lifted me up between the earth and the heaven, and brought me in the visions of Yahuwah to Jerusalem. So this is talking about the prophet Ezekiel. He had locks as well. And then the most known one for having locks, of course, because it ties into his testimony, his story, is Samson. In the book of Judges, chapter 16, verse 19, it records, and she made him sleep upon her knees, and she called for a man and caused him to shave off the 7 locks of his head, and she began to afflict him, and his strength went from him. All of these people in the Bible that I just mentioned were Nazarenes. They did not cut their hair, so it grew long, it got nappy, and it dreaded. That's why it is called locks. Samson had 7 long locks. He never cut his hair, so it dreaded up and turned into 7 long locks. Even King Solomon might have had dreads as well. It says in the Song of Solomon, chapter 5, verse 11, his head is as the most fine gold. His locks are bushy and black as a raven. This was a common thing for Israelites to have. This was a common hairstyle for Israelites to wear. They had locks, or what we call today dreadlocks. And who is known for rocking dreadlocks today? Because I could tell you that for black people in America, they don't like us wearing dreadlocks at certain job positions. They don't even like us having dreadlocks when we sign up to join the army. This is not their culture. This is not something that they are fond of.
An Illinois man who traveled to Des Moines for a job at a trucking company said he was let go because he refused to cut his dreadlocks.
Well, Stephanie, Drew Harvey behind me, he told me earlier today that during his orientation weeks ago, a supervisor from TMC Transportation in Des Moines told him he had to get a buzz cut to wear a hard hat on the job.
A South Fulton police officer is suing the city of South Fulton, claiming gender and religious discrimination.
A lawsuit filed today on behalf of the officer says he was forced to cut his dreadlocks as part of the terms of his employment.
But as for us, this is a part of our lifestyle. This is a natural hairstyle for us. This isn't something new that we just started doing. We have deep historical ties with having dreadlocks. This hairstyle is achieved simply by our natural hair. We don't have to genetically modify ourselves or add products to get it. It's just it comes naturally, just like the Israelites who were born and never touch their hair at all. It just naturally formed into dreadlocks. And that is something that mostly only black people can accomplish.
I know some of you got him hanging on your wall, a black man with locks, but Jesus was not a black man.
It's a possibility, a high possibility that he probably did, because that is what his ancestors had as well. He did not have what these Jewish people in the land today are rocking, the little 2-side curly, whatever it is. They didn't have that. They had actual locks. Now, whether the Messiah had dreads or not, we do not know that. But we do know that he had hair of wool. And there are Bible verses that gives us this description. Why they choose to ignore that, I don't know. There is also Bible verses that confirms that his skin color was like brass. This can be found in Revelation chapter 1, verse 15. So this confirms that he was indeed a melanated man. Even in the Old Testament, when the prophets was given visions of the Messiah who was to appear, they have the same description of him appearing as being black, as being brown, brass, whatever you want to call it. He had color. Ezekiel chapter 40, verse 3, and he brought me there, and behold, there was a man whose appearance was like the appearance of brass, with the line of flax in his hand and a measuring reed, and he stood in the gate. So if you don't know what Ezekiel 40 is about, it's about the new temple of Jerusalem being ushered in on earth. So the man that he saw was our Messiah. This is when the Messiah returns. So that is how he appeared based on Ezekiel accounts when he received this vision from the Most High. Now the color brass is similar to copper, so that would be the equivalent of a penny, which is considered to be a brownish color. You also have the Statue of Liberty, which was originally copper looking. Later on it ended up fading to green, but that was its original state. And when you search up the term copper colored person or people, you're going to see that the Native American Indians were called copper-colored people. And it was similar to the rest of the Asiatic region. That's why they were called Indians by Columbus. He was referring to the actual Indians in India when he saw them because of the color of their skin. They had brown skin, similar to those also in the region that we call the Middle East today. And this color, this copper color, was considered to be a reddish brown. That's why you have the football team that used to be called the Washington Redskins. And it had a logo of a Native American. These people were copper colored. They were brown-skinned people living in America. I'm not saying that they're related to sub-Saharan African people who we call black. I'm just saying that most of the world is melanated. Most of the world is brown, full of brown people. So sub-Saharan Africans, aka black people, also fall within this range. Their skin tone ranges from extremely dark to light. There are light-skinned black people such as there are dark-skinned black people. It's really diverse when it comes to black people. There's some that may be lighter than the Native American people. There's some that can be lighter than Mexican people or Indians. There's some who's darker, of course. So we really have the most diverse skin pigmentation on Earth. I mean, Michael Jackson is proof of that. So many people have dark skin due to melanin all around this world. And sometimes it's based on your region. If you're closer to the equator, then sometimes you're going to be more darker. And of course, genetics play a role in this as well. So if most of the world is melanated to begin with, why is it so offensive for people to be considered black, to fall into that category? Why is it such a shame to be a part of that community? So let's dig into where this term came from and why it was applied for only one specific people. Well, if you don't know, the term for black used to be Negro. In fact, that term black is fairly new. It started being used in the 1960s after the Civil Rights Movement. Before that, black people, black Americans, were called Negroes. And this was going back all the way to the 1400s. Even before we came to the Americas, we were called Negroes. And there's proof of that. But for those who don't know, that is a Spanish term. And in Portuguese, it comes from the Latin word Niger, where English took the word, of course, and made it offensive, but it came from the Spanish word Negro, which has the same meaning of the color black. It's important to know the history of when this word started being used and who it was being applied to. So we're talking about Jesus here. Philip Anthony Mitchell said he's not a black man. He's not a Negro.
I know some of you got him hanging on your wall, a black man with locks, but Jesus was not a black man. We know from history.
So all you have to do is search up, did Spaniards call Jews Negro? And here's what you're going to get. Here's the results. It says, yes, historical sources indicate that some Spaniards and other Europeans in the early modern period referred to Jews, particularly those from the Iberian Peninsula, using terms like Negro or black, often to denote a perceived dark complexion or a link to African descent. And these terms were given in a racialized sense as they were developing theories of biological race and purity of blood during that time. So this is around the time that they began to come up with these theories based on race. Now, if you don't know your history, the Moors at the time, as well as Jews, were living in the land that we call Spain today. They took it over, and they lived there from 700s to 1492. And it's also important that you know about the Visigoths, because they were living in that land as well before the Muslims arrived, and these were Europeans. So what happened is once the Muslims came, they ended up migrating north, but some of their people still remained in the lower lands. So they began to mix with the Muslims, and you had mixed people living in the land of Spain. So in the 15th century, they came up with an ideal called limpieza de sangre, which means cleanliness of blood or purity of blood. And it was basically done to tell Europeans apart from those who were Jews or Muslims in ancestry. They wanted to see who was actually pure blood. So this was the doctrine that they used to discriminate against the Muslims and the Jews, or those who were mixed. We have evidence that these Jews were indeed black. This was confirmed by an early writer and traveler known as François Maximilien Misson. He was born in the year 1650, and he traveled all throughout Europe. And here's what he wrote in one of his travel guides. Quote, "'Tis also a vulgar error that the Jews are all black. For this is only true of the Portuguese Jews who marrying always among one another beget children like themselves, and consequently the swarthiness of their complexion is entailed upon their whole race, even in the northern regions. But the Jews who are originally of Germany, those, for example, I have seen at Prague, are not blacker than the rest of their countrymen." So for context, he is saying that not all Jews are black. He didn't say the Jews are not black. He said not all are black, confirming that there is indeed black Jews. And then he gave his account of where these black Jews were. He said, "It is true of the Portuguese Jews, those who lived in the Iberian Peninsula." He said they always marry amongst themselves, so their children turn out like themselves. That is swarthiness, aka black. So he's saying, since he saw the Jews who lived in Germany, those that we call Ashkenazi Jews today, the Jewish people who's in Israel today, he's saying since he's seen them, then that means not all Jews are black. So I just find it rather interesting that someone like Philip Anthony Mitchell and others speak so confidently about saying Jews are not black, when historically that wasn't the case. And I think that does a disservice, because he is speaking on something that he does not understand or have knowledge of. It is pure ignorance to speak on something that you have no clue about what you're talking about. And I hope this is being done out of ignorance and not bad faith. I hope he's not someone that's being used by, the people in Israel who's known for buying off politicians and flying out preachers so they could come back to the States and give their own narratives. I hope he's not a part of that group.
So 2018, my wife and I go to Israel. We tour the whole country from the north. From the Golan Heights. You've been to Israel, all the way in the north. I fly there for Israel because I really wanted to hear from the Lord. I feel like I'm preaching and I'm leading, but I don't have no sense of clear identity. And I'm like, Lord, I need you to speak to me while I'm here. Bro, the Lord don't say nothing to me. I know some of you got him hanging on your wall, a black man with locks, but Jesus was not a black man. We know from history, and we know...
Jews, especially those from Portugal and Spain, they were black. They were called Negroes. And there's proof of that. The first man to be called Negro was in the 12th century, and he was a Jew who went by the name Yahya Yaish. His nickname was Dam Yahya Old Negro, and he was the leader of the Jews in Spain. They were described by contemporaries, including other Europeans, as having dark or swarthy complexion, sometimes compared to the Moors, who were North Africans, with whom they had long lived amongst. A 16th century Portuguese Jewish writer, Samuel Usque, noted that the Jews of Portugal and Spain are known by their color, which is dark, like the Moors among whom they have lived so long. So this is proof that we're not just making things up out of thin air. And you also can't say that this has no relevance to Jesus, Yeshua the Messiah, because these were his people. The Jews of Spain and Portuguese trace back to King David. They came from the Sephardic lineage that claimed descent from King David via the exilarchs of Babylon. So these Jews came from the Babylon captivity. That was when the temple was destroyed and King Nebuchadnezzar took Judeans into slavery into Babylon. And reportedly, he took those who were direct descendants of the kings, such as King David, he took them to Spain or the Iberian Peninsula. And then later on, more Jews ended up traveling to that same region. And this is recorded in the Bible. In Romans chapter 15, the Apostle Paul mentions these Jews being in Spain because he had hoped to visit them and to give them the gospel. Now, he didn't make it there, but he still acknowledged that there were indeed Jews living in Spain. So you cannot deny none of what is being said. All of this is based off history as well as the Bible. We're not making things up.
But Jesus was not a black man. We know from history.
Revelation chapter 5, verse 5. And one of the elders said unto me, Weep not, behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, has prevailed to open the book. So this is talking about Jesus, Yeshua, the Messiah. He came from the tribe of Judah and of the lineage of David, just like the Jews who lived in the Iberian Peninsula. That is what we now call Spain and Portugal. They were his direct descendants or kindred. And just in case some of you are still skeptic, believing that these Jews of Spain weren't connected at all to the sub-Saharan people in Africa, aka black people, here's a background on what happened to these Jews who were in Spain and Portugal. We know that after 1492, they either were forced to convert or be expelled from Spain. Many of them moved to Portugal. But in 1497, King Manuel I also forced many of them to convert or be expelled. So many chose to flee rather than to convert, because Christianity, which was known as Catholicism, was different than what they believed in. And I'm not going to get into that, but it went against their way of life. So they rather escaped than to convert and to sin against the Most High. So they ended up going into North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa. Yes, they were in the region that was called Negroland, the land of the blacks, Bilad Al Sudan. And this is recorded on European maps. So they were living amongst those that we like to call Sub-Saharan Africans. These Jews were there. They populated there. And what happened is Portugal ended up colonizing the coast of Africa. So they would take these Jews and send them to the Americas as slaves. And this ties into the Papal Edict, which the Pope ordered or gave confirmation to Portugal and Spain to enslave anyone who wasn't considered Catholic or European. Eventually it became race-based. So many of these Sephardic Jews ended up in America, in Latin America, and the Caribbean. And they are still there today, just like the Bible said. The Jews will be scattered to the four corners of the earth. They are still in captivity. So that's what happened to the Jews who were in Spain. That's what happened to Yahya, who was called a Negro. He was scattered to the New World, just like most black people were. But they don't tell you this part of history, and that's deliberately. They are covering it up.
They manipulate our history books. The history books are not true. It's a lie. The history books are lying. You need to know that. You must know that.
They don't tell you that the first enslaved Africans or black people to be brought here to the United States of America, which wasn't America at the time, of course, but it was in Virginia where they were brought to. They were originally going to the New Spain. They were going to Mexico. But Englishmen kidnapped them and brought them to America. The names of these Africans were Anthony and Isabella, and they actually were from Angola. And at the time, Angola was a part of Portugal. They colonized it. So this is where they were bringing their slaves from, and many of them were Jews. And many probably are thinking, why would they do that, knowing that these are Jesus, Messiah's kindred? Well, because they are Catholics. They don't give reverence to the Jews as being the Most High chosen people. They feel like they had replaced them. This is a part of their doctrine. They believe that the Jews killed Jesus. So it wasn't by mistake that they brought the Jews into slavery. They knew exactly what they were doing and who they were taking to the New World. So the first slaves that was reported or documented as being brought to North America in 1619, they were called Negroes, just like the Jews in Spain. And this was used in early records to describe these Africans, a term considered standard for the era but now outdated, reflecting their status as the foundational generation of African Americans in English colonies. So the first black people in America came from Angola, and we know historically that Portuguese Jews lived in Angola dating all the way back to the 1500s, as some fled persecution and they settled in that region, which was known as Luanda. Now today they say that this community all of a sudden disappeared, but they are still there. They simply converted to Christianity. They were forced to convert. And what this did was it caused them to assimilate into European culture. So most of them no longer are seen as being Jews because they don't have the same traditions and uphold the same culture that their ancestors did because they were ruled over by colonizers. And all of this is documented and based on facts. You can Google, was Angola Jews described as black? And you're going to get the answer yes.
But Jesus was not a black man. We know from history.
So when you get on here and say that the Jews were not black, they had no black features, there was no relation at all to black people, then you are lying. You are walking in ignorance. And there's consequences for lying about something like that. You need to come out of that lie. You need to repent. Because not only are you walking in deception, but you are leading other people into being deceived.
That period is a period of 7 years in which during that period, a man, a political figure, a spiritual figure is going to rise, and he will be called the Antichrist. He will sign a 7-year peace treaty with the nation of Israel. You know what he's talking about? The greatest miracle we will ever see. He's talking about people who were once far away from God, heard the gospel, turned towards God because of preaching, put their faith in Christ. We see a revival exploded in Israel. They saw salvation.
It feels actually really nice to have this community ensure that all of the gay people and people that want to celebrate gay pride feel safe to do so.
You see these videos of Christians, priests with crucifixes around their necks getting spit on in Jerusalem.
He spit on me and he touched me.
Are those real?
Yes, and I mean, that's happened before, you know, even from the first days that I was there. There'd be occasionally something like that. And occasionally there were graffiti put on walls and, sprayed on Jesus a monkey, 2013.
They say Israel is the only place where we're respected and protected.
And I can attest to that as a Christian who went to Israel. I spent 2 weeks there with the church, and we had an incredible time. We had only one incident where a small child spit on one of the pastors.
Every revival exploded in Israel. They saw salvation.
And this is all going to come back to hurt you guys one day, because you guys are walking in pure ignorance. You're avoiding or ignoring all the facts.
Stan said that those people over there are the Jews. See, his church won't challenge him. We will challenge him and say, prove it in the Bible. Prove that white folks in the Bible is the ethnic Jews. He won't be able to do it. All of that. Give me Ezekiel 7, please.
And I will give it into the hands of strangers.
God said he would give the land of Israel into the hand of strangers.
He came to his own first, the people of Israel, the Jewish race. So we know that Jesus was not a black man. I don't care what false doctrine. I don't care about no Hebrew Israelite. We know that Jesus was not a black man. But some of us use our race as idolatry. I don't care. Black people do that. White people do that. We exalt our race as a form of idolatry. Jesus was not a black man. He was an ethnic Jew and had skin like brass and hair like wool. Jesus was not a black man. He was an ethnic Jew and had skin like brass and hair like wool. Skin like brass and hair like wool.
Why you always lying? Oh my gosh. Why you always lying? Oh my gosh.
Ladies and gentlemen, if it looks like a duck, if it walks like a duck, if it quacks like a duck, then what is it? What is it?
So repent of your pride and ask the Most High for knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. Yah bless.